Hello, welcome back to part two of our introduction to the Aeneid. So I'm just going to jump right in here and pick up where I left off. So moving on to the next slide of the presentation, we're going to get into some terms here. You know, a big part of this course is all of these various vocabulary, literary terms that you're going to need to know. So again, just like with all the other works, I'm going to introduce you to some terms that you'll need to know in relation to this work. Now, I'm going to start with this one, which is a word that you know from probably a biblical sense, which is apocalypse. But what does that word really mean? It's simply the destruction of a civilization. When they talk about the apocalypse in the Bible, it's referencing the end of the world. But in a sense, an apocalypse happens anytime the world as you know it is destroyed. So that's what we get in the Aeneid, with that great description of the sacking of Troy and what happened there and how the city of Troy was basically destroyed by the enemy. That's a big part of what we get in those early books of the Aeneid, especially all of book 2 is about that destruction. And then it's also about what transpires when one man in particular, who has survived that destruction, must go forth and try to find a new home, a new start, a new place to begin again. And it even begs the question of whether that's possible or not. But this is the mission that Aeneas is kind of saddled with, is can he find a new sanctuary following the destruction of his civilization? So I'm having a little trouble getting this to advance. There we go. So that's going to bring us to our next term, which is dystopia. And dystopia is it's the opposite of utopia. So when we refer to utopia, it's an ideal civilization. Well, dystopia is the exact opposite of that. What I stated here is it's a community that is terrible and frightening. And often a dystopian society is a direct result of some sort of apocalyptic event. So, if we have an apocalypse, then, whatever the case may be, whether that's from war or it's natural disaster, whatever, it's going to leave that community and those people in a state of dystopia. Just like in the image here, this is the aftermath of a blitzkrieg attack during World War II. So this cop is trying to help this kid whose parents have been buried in this rubble, right? And they've got to go through all of this rubble to maybe, hopefully, locate the child's parents or some family. But that's what that's depicting, and it's showing what happens in a dystopic environment, which is an environment born of disaster. And we've got, again, you think about things that are happening in the world right now. So we've got a lot of catastrophic events that have been happening recently. And we've got, you think about what's happening in Gaza, in the Middle East. all of the bombings taking place. We recently had the wildfires in Los Angeles and all the destruction that has wrought. But dystopia, again, comes about from the destruction of civilization as we know it. Which brings us to dystopic stories as literature. These stories have always been with us. You know, the Aeneid alone is upwards of over 1,000 years old. And these stories have been around forever, and they continue to be hugely popular. And these, what I've put here, these are just a couple of examples, you know, from more recent times. But the Hunger Games, that's a story of people trying to survive in a dystopic universe. Something like The Walking Dead, you know, what happens if there's a zombie apocalypse? Right, and it's really the story of these survivors of this pandemic who are, you know, trying to forge a new life in the aftermath of this apocalypse. But these stories, they've always been with us, and like I said, they continue to be hugely popular because I think there's a part of us that identifies with that struggle and the possibility of that struggle. So let's talk about what are some of the major themes of dystopian works. And of course, why is that relevant for us? Because the Aeneid is going to deal with all of these themes. First, survival. That's the most important one of all. How do you survive in a world that's gone to hell? All right, you got to get your basic needs met. You got to have food. You got to have shelter. Eventually, there will probably be conflicts over leadership because in the beginning, you know, people are just trying to survive. They tend to gravitate towards an individual who seems to be capable of being in control. But then over time, that person's leadership may start to be challenged, you know. So oftentimes these stories kind of evolve from these conflicts over leadership. Finding sanctuary, you know, a place to call home, a place to feel safe again, rebuilding their lives again, and rebuilding human relationships. And these stories really beg the question of whether that's possible or not. Institutions will often be sacrificed in a dystopic world. You know, things that people take for granted like religion, education, art, you know, these things are important, but they're not important when you're starving. They're not important when you are struggling just to survive day to day. And so oftentimes what happens is these institutions that we think build community and that make us human, they tend to crumble, you know, and eventually people realize, well, I'm starving, I don't need art. We're starving and we just need to survive. We've got to have food and shelter and clothing. You know, education is not important right now. Religion, even though in the beginning people will try hard to hang on to faith, but when the times get tough enough, even that will be called into question. You know, and what are you going to do? I mean, it's not like there are any more churches you can go to. So you might hang on to your faith, but then again, what we see oftentimes in these stories is faith starts to be questioned, or just how important are these things to us in the grander scheme of things. So this story, like so many others of this genre, is a story of people trying to survive and to overcome and to rebuild these institutions. Now, a little bit about the historical time period. At the time the Aeneid takes place and was written, I'm not quite sure why. I think that's just the way my screen is displaying, guys. So I apologize that it's cut off there. But Egypt is in its last years as a great civilization. Cleopatra is the queen of Egypt during this time. And the reason this is important and relevant for us is because there is going to be an alliance with the Roman Empire because of her affair with Mark Antony, a soldier from the Roman Empire. In the Aeneid, her equivalent is the character Queen Dido of Carthage, who is portrayed as a very powerful woman of the ancient world. And that's going to be major. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The power of Western civilization has shifted from Greece to Rome. Jesus Christ is only a few decades away from birth. Julius Caesar becomes emperor of Rome during Virgil's lifetime. And also Augustus Caesar, when he comes to power, is during the time of the poet Virgil, who is the author of the Aeneid. Okay, I need to get a little bit more into what really happens with this affair between Aeneas and Queen Dido, because that's going to be crucially important to the story. And there's a little bit of history about that I want to give to you that I think might be a little bit mind-blowing to think about. Okay. But I can see my time is rapidly running out on this video. I'd rather risk not getting cut short. So in the interest of that, I'm going to go ahead and close this video out. I'm going to get this one uploaded, and I'm going to make a part 3. So stay tuned for that.